Where? Hi, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for joining us. My name is Pana Poto. I'm a senior family educator at INCLUDEnyc. Welcome to INCLUDEnyc Live. This is one in a series of live stream presentations that we give the third Thursday of every month. And today's topic is a parent's introduction to the sensory system. Joining me is Melissa Callahan. Melissa?
Hi, everyone.
So I just would like, before we get into this topic of sensory integration, I just want to let you guys know this topic is very intriguing to me. I love everything about sensory. It's something I always want to learn more about. And I know there are a lot of parents out there that would love to know a lot more information as well. So I'm delighted to have Melissa here with me today. Melissa, can you introduce yourself to our listeners?
Absolutely, my pleasure. My name is Melissa Callahan. I am an occupational therapist. And it has been my passion, actually, to be an occupational therapist for about 25 years now. I had to do the math. I was kind of astounded. I've been in pediatrics about 23 of those years.
Okay.
Prior to being a pediatric OT, I worked with adults with brain injury.
Okay.
But my introduction to occupational therapy was interesting because prior to being an OT, I worked as a respite provider for families with autism.
Okay.
So I think that's how I ended up as a pediatric OT.
Okay.
How I came to working so closely with families in the field and so deeply in the sensory integration framework is took a lot of coursework in sensory integration and neuroscience. I'm absolutely fascinated with how the brain works and how it doesn't work because of my work with individuals with brain trauma and community reentry for individuals with brain trauma. So I've taken some classroom training in neuroscience, advanced training in sensory integration, and I've been fortunate enough to take the full complement of coursework for the sensory integration and praxis test, which includes advanced clinical coursework in neuroscience,
Right.
the SIP test itself, the research into the SIP, and then the actual 40 hours of coursework of delivering the test, scoring the test, and then writing the test up and using the test for children from 5 years of age through 12 years of age, and then doing the research to take the test all the way back to children down to 3 years of age. So all of that coursework and then all of the research to do the test backwards. So it's been wonderful, all of that coursework. And then I've been teaching sensory integration for about 20 years now.
So we have a lot of
it's been fascinating.
Yeah,
it's been quite the journey.
So we are really delighted to have you here and to be able to get all this knowledge from you today. So before we start, I just wanted to get into some housekeeping. We're going to try to keep this under 60 minutes. If you have any questions, you can leave it in the chat box. What we're going to do is, if it's something that we're not going to be addressing as we speak, we'll definitely try to get to your question at the end of the live stream. So Melissa, let's get into it. Some of the things that we're going to talk about today, we kind of want to break down for parents and make this information, as parent-friendly as possible.
Absolutely.
So I would like us to really talk about what is sensory integration, what is sensory processing. I know sensory is a word that's thrown around a lot, but there's really not a lot of understanding of what it really means, and I've gotten that from parents and from professionals in the field as well. So can you give us a little bit of an overview about sensory integration?
Yeah. When you talk about sensory and sensory processing, one of the main things is that all of that falls under sensory integration.
Right.
And one of the things that we talk about as sensory integration, it's a term that we use, many different professionals use the term. Behaviorists like to use the term to talk about behavior that is observable, that we can see that integration is happening in the brain, things are going on, both sides of the brain are talking, all the parts of the brain are talking, but we can see that there is observable behavior. In neuroscience, which is all kind of the small parts of the brain, everything is happening together. All of the connections are happening, and things are happening smoothly. So integration is happening between all of the chemicals in the brain. And then when we talk about occupational therapists, when I say we, I mean we as OTs and therapists, we talk about it as both as a framework, but also as a therapeutic modality. And the person that you'll find if you go on the interwebs, as I like to say, or as you Google it and look for assistance and look for therapy programs, you'll find a woman called Jean Ayers, and she's the one who coined sensory integration and developed the framework for OTs to use it. She was actually a neuroscientist before she became an OT, and she started looking around at developing what would become the framework that we use to guide our treatment. And in very lay terminology, I mean, there's a whole big term that, with all kinds of fancy words, but the process by which we receive information through our senses, organize the information, and then use it to participate in everyday activities. So I kind of liken it to a computer. You type in the information, the computer does what it does on the inside, and then it shows you on the screen, and then if you want, you can print it out. We try not to these days, but you can print it out. And so we use that as our guidelines, and then as a framework, we try to, as therapists, try to put in controlled information. So that the people that we're working with can then build controlled responses and learn to build a variety of responses to this controlled input, so that they will have them to call upon as they're going out into the world, with the safe space of the clinic, to go out and search through their files and say, okay, there's something like this I saw in the clinic, but may not match, but it's close enough. And then their response, their behavior that you'll see, will be what they do. So that's the big sensory integration broken down into as lay as possible.
And one thing so one of the reasons why I asked, what sensory integration was, is because we kind of want to give parents and everyone who's listening, some of the background about what this is, and then to kind of give you the language to be able to use, because you have therapists coming into your home, you're taking your child to a center, they're evaluating your child. It's good for us to also have the language, for us to also have like a basic understanding of what it is that our children are experiencing. Because I remember when my daughter was in early intervention, when she was being evaluated for early intervention, one of the occupational therapists came. I told her, I said, my daughter has some vestibular challenges. She has her head down on the ground and her butt is up in the air, so I guess she heard me use the word vestibular, and I guess as a parent, I'm not supposed to know what that means. So
you're not supposed to know anything.
I'm like, I'm just supposed to be like, yes, ma'am, okay. She's like, she's like, no, I don't want you to tell me what they told you to say. Tell me what you've observed. And then I try to explain to her. I say, I do have a son who's on the autism spectrum. He's 12. I'm kind of familiar with what this is. I may not be an occupational therapist, but I'm familiar.
But you have knowledge.
I have some knowledge. And one of the goals we want to achieve today is to be able to give families at least the basics to be able to kind of understand.
So you understand that, vestibular is movement related. She was trying to stimulate some part of her inner ears.
Exactly.
Or relieve some sort of discomfort that she had with her environment by going into a particular position.
Exactly.
So you weren't telling her what they told you to say. You were saying, I understand that this system functions in this way, and this is what my kid is doing to relieve that. Help me sort that out.
Exactly.
So, that's one thing that, as a therapist, we try not to discount what the parent says, because that's valuable information.
The parent voice is so important in all of this.
It's really
so important, because we are the ones who are with our kids so many hours of the day. We get to see how they act, how they behave, what affects them, what doesn't affect them. So I would like us to get a little bit into, you were talking before, I was wondering if you could break down sensory modulation and what that means and how it can present.
Sensory, we talked, yes, we did
Yeah.
talk about this a little bit before we started.
Yeah.
About sensory modulation, because that is so important for kids, for anybody.
Right.
Being modulated, what does that mean? And that's kind of like the basis for everything. And I attack it, and I tackle that from a typically, it was typical these days, typically developing child or a typical person.
Right.
We do modulation, hopefully, successfully on our own. We modulate ourselves. We do these things that get ourselves ready to face the day. We get a good night's sleep, hopefully.
Right.
We get up in the morning, we have coffee, we shower, we meditate, we exercise. We regulate our system naturally so that we can face the day ready to go. We have a good baseline.
Right.
Right? So that's modulated. We're modulated. We're within a normal range, like this normal window of, okay, if the siren goes off, it's not going to put us into orbit. It's
Right.
not going to fray our nerves. We're modulated, and throughout the course of the day, we, typically functioning adults, hopefully, do things to, remodulate our system after we've had a bad phone call or listened to too much noise walking through Times Square, getting on the subway, and it's awfully loud, or we got wet and we got cold and our system became dysregulated.
Right.
We do things to bring ourselves back down, or we got too tired and we too droopy, so we were sitting at our desk for too long, so we get up and move around, and we can feel ourselves come back into the normal range. So that is us performing different types of activities, whether it's lifting weights, proprioceptive input, or vestibular moving, whether it's dancing, which is a very disorganized type of movement to stimulate our system, to re-regulate our system, to modulate our system. Children who have sensory processing and sensory modulation difficulties are not functioning in that optimal range on a regular basis. So they go to bed, they may not sleep well at night. So they don't get the benefit of being modulated first thing in the morning.
Right.
They don't have any way to communicate that this is what they need in terms of a regular schedule in the morning to modulate themselves. So they are already functioning with the world on their last nerve.
Right.
They're already dysregulated. And then something happens and throws them off even further. And they don't have a way to communicate that they need to get back to the optimal range. So it's this spiral out of control. So we have to have a way, we have to find a way to get them into that optimal range so that they can learn to engage with the world in a better way, and so that they can be prepared for learning or for working. We do it naturally. They don't have that skill. Children learn how to do that through experimenting with the environment, experimenting with different things. You'll see kids, running or jumping or doing all these things. You'll see adults doing different things. You'll see children with sensory processing issues trying all sorts of different things and failing. And they'll just keep spiraling out of control. And that's where we come in as parents or as providers, watching and watching and watching. You'll see us collecting data, which it seems like forever, but we're collecting data to try to find out what works.
To try to get that info. As you were talking about sleep, it just made me think about the weighted blankets.
I love my weighted blanket.
Everybody seems to be getting a weighted blanket now, because I know now you can get, before it was so expensive to get one. It's like now.
Yeah,
there
we used to
seems
go
be
old
more.
school. I found out
Yeah.
that I loved my weighted blanket through Sandy. We had no heat. And so I had like 5 blankets on top, and I didn't think I was a weighted blanket person
Right.
until we had no heat for weeks and weeks and weeks. And I was like, wow, I had insomnia for years.
And then you were finally able to sleep.
And I was finally able to sleep.
Wow.
So my birthday just passed last week.
Okay.
My partner ordered me a weighted blanket, and he even loves it. He's like, I didn't think I was a weighted blanket person either.
Yeah, because it really made me think, because imagine a child who may have needed that proprioceptive input having to go to sleep and just feeling like they're floating in the bed.
Yeah.
And then we expect them to just get up and go about their day in a regular way and not feel
Just
dysregulated. Yeah.
But I should have figured it out for myself. I've been a weightlifter all my life. Proprioceptive input.
Right, from the weights, yeah.
Which I love.
Yeah.
It would follow that a weighted blanket would work for me.
Right.
But I don't have that, but I do enough. I meditate, I do yoga. These are all things that I do to help myself.
So one thing I wanted to do really
Proprioceptive
quickly.
input. Fancy word for you?
Yeah. So we've spoken about proprioceptive. We talked about vestibular, right? So
we talked about modulation.
Right. So normally when we do some of our early childhood workshops, I kind of mentioned to parents, we have 5 senses everybody knows about, but there are 3 additional senses that you may not hear about often. I know that proprioceptive is one, vestibular is one, and interoception is one.
Yeah, but that's
So,
those are interoception. People don't even talk about, like, your body sense.
I found out about that one
kinesthesia.
really recently, within the last year or so.
Yeah.
I wasn't.
How
really
did you
sure
find out about it?
I was doing research for a training that I was working on,
Oh my
and I was like, oh, okay. So this talks about the regulation of the body temperature, the hunger, and all of that, and the physical condition of the body.
Yeah, and people don't consider.
Yeah.
Internal awareness.
Right.
Like and like how you feel inside.
Right.
And not feelings,
Mm-hmm.
but the actual physical feeling of what your stomach feels like from the inside out.
Right.
Like stuffing food.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was really, really, really interesting stuff. So I wanted us to go a little bit into what does sensory integration look like. So if you could just give us some ideas, like I know when we had spoken before, you gave some examples of some people who like soft clothing, or they're not able to wear wool because it irritates the skin. And I just wanted you to talk a little bit about that.
Sensory integration, or sensory disintegration. It's like one of those things you can always say you'll know it when you see it. But sensory integration, it looks like it sounds. People who are integrated, people who can function well, and for kids it's really interesting. Because it's like you watch the gears come together. Adults functioning well, you see every day.
Right.
But for sensory integration in children is really interesting, because you'll see kids try things and you'll see them, and then all of a sudden something clicks with them. And then you're like, you watch it, and you're like, oh, they just found what works for them.
Right.
And it's wonderful to see, because you'll see kids try a bunch of different things that may or may not be working for them, different exercises, like different sports.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting, because you'll see a child like standing on a soccer field. They hate it. They're like, I can't do this. And, these kids are touching me. I don't want to play this sport. I don't understand it. I don't like it. I'm running around. I don't like it. They're crying.
Right.
They hate it. But then they go and they try karate. And it's organized, it's orderly, and they do these things, and they glow. That's what sensory integration looks like. Everything that works for them. You see a child who there is no way they are completing that art project.
Right.
No.
Yeah.
There is glue and glitter and
Yeah.
I'm not touching that, this, that, or something else.
Right.
Not happening. There's gooey things. I don't know what that is. I'm not doing it. No. But you give them like modeling clay, and it's heavy, and they love it, and they can squeeze it, and then they make something like really intricate. And then they get the tools out, and they're like carving things, and it's like they made like the David in front of you.
Right.
That's what sensory integration looks like, when you find the right thing for the child and it works for them. So everything's working. They're modulated. They feel good. They're sitting down or they're standing up. You could find a child who's like standing up and he may be moving. The whole time he's doing it.
Yeah, that's helping.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's doing it. Not saying a word. Maybe he has headphones on. Could be talking to himself. But he's like, creating this beautiful sculpture out of this clay that you never thought you would taught.
Yeah.
But that's what sensory integration is when everything is working together. They're taking in information, they're discarding information they don't need, and it's beautiful.
So what happens on the flip side of that with disintegration when things aren't working?
When things aren't working, and you see this all the time, when the child is just distraught. They don't have the language to tell you that they have had it. They're not able to take in any more information and process it well. They are outside of that optimal range. They are not modulated. They're in an environment that is not good for them, whether it's too loud or too quiet. Could be too quiet.
Yeah.
And they need to create
that noise. Yeah.
They need to create something to keep them awake.
Right.
Or they've been on the school bus for an hour and a half in New York City traffic with other kids jumping.
Right.
And they haven't eaten, or they haven't eaten the right thing, and their feet are wet, and they're completely having a meltdown. That meltdown is disintegration because they can't tell you what it is.
Right.
There is something that is, they can't take in any more information. They can't process any more information. And they don't have either the words or any language skills whatsoever. And then go like this to say, tell me something. That touch or that eye contact, that's it. So sensory disintegration can look like a temper tantrum.
Right.
It can look like a meltdown. It can also look like a child taking a nap because they could be so overblown that they have completely shut down. They could be hiding under the table, flat as a board, with a blanket over their head, shaking. And it is your job as the adult in the room to figure out if the child under the table, shaking and crying, is really in a state of complete overload and being overwhelmed.
So it really takes
and you have to walk it back.
Yeah, it really takes us as the adults to really be in tune with the children in our lives, right?
Yeah.
Because if a typical person just saw a child hiding under the table or yelling or like trying to regulate themselves, they may just see it as challenging behavior if they don't really understand. Yeah, like
that parent does not have control of that.
Exactly.
What a brat.
Exactly.
What a bad parent.
Exactly. And it causes a lot of anxiety for the family, and it's just not a good situation.
Yeah, the kids lose out on social situations.
Right.
The family loses out on family time.
Exactly.
We talked about, trying to feed kids. They lose out on all this wonderful food here in New York City, all of these social situations, all the culture, because you don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah,
it's
because you have like the sense of taste. Like we all have a sense of taste, and some people like things that are crunchy, some people like things that are not. And I never know what's gonna happen. Yeah, and I was telling you earlier about my daughter how particular she is. Like when she's having pizza, it has to be the New York style pizza. It has to be a certain shape. It has to be a certain texture. If it doesn't look like that, she doesn't want it.
And you never know what's gonna happen when you're presented with that, because you never know what the environment is gonna bring and where it's going to fall.
Exactly.
So you never know at what point, if they're not modulated, you never know at what point they're going to fall outside of that optimal range and what that disintegration is going to look like.
Yeah.
And what opportunities are going to be lost. So you have to be ready.
Yes.
And information is the best way to be ready. You have to arm yourself with information and be as ready as possible.
I totally agree.
Yeah. So it's
So
it's hard. It's hard.
So can you talk a little bit about, how this can look for a child who may be over-responsive, sensory seeking, under-responsive?
Yeah.
How can that look?
So when a child when we're looking at the modulation part of it, when a child is over responsive to incoming information, do you hear that?
Yeah.
That would be the most fascinating sound in the entire universe right now.
It's like a siren, so
Yeah,
in
it's
case
like
anyone was
like,
wondering.
yeah, or
Yeah.
more,
Some
more,
kind of
but
alarm or
like,
something. I don't know.
but it's like like 4 blocks away. So it would be like a white noise machine that your coworker 2 rooms over has. But it would be the most fascinating sound in the room to somebody. Or the clicking of somebody else's mouse 3 desks over would be the most fascinating sound in the room. Or I cut my thumb on my screensaver. You have those Gorilla Glass. Glass.
Yeah.
Cut my thumb on that like 2 hours ago. That would be the most fascinating piece of skin ever. So oversensitive.
Right.
Like the new fragrance that somebody in your office wore 3 days ago that is still lingering in the room. That would be the most fascinating smell ever. So they would be overly sensitive to any changes in the environment. That is somebody who is oversensitive to anything. Somebody who is undersensitive to anything or under-responsive. Under-responsive, I can speak. Somebody who's under-responsive. That would be that person who, you move a little bit in your chair.
Yeah.
They would be the one who if you had a bouncy chair, the ball chairs.
Yeah.
They would be the ones who would literally bounce out of the chair in order to feel anything. Like, they're the ones going. Like,
and what about the under-responsive, and what about the sensory seeking?
They are they're more extreme than the under-responsive.
Okay.
They're the ones who, I want to say they're like the extreme sport enthusiasts.
Right.
They're the ones who kind of, they, when I say, the people bouncing the chairs, like, no, these are the people who would be like, let's just rappel through the office because that would be really good. That's a great idea. We're gonna use the whiteboard. We're gonna make the whole wall a whiteboard, and we're just gonna rappel down the wall and use that. Like, these people are the adrenaline junkies. They seek extreme experiences in order to modulate the system. They need that extra input. These are the people that the gym is not good enough for them. They're the ones who go to Brooklyn Boulders for their workout.
Right.
They're not gonna run at the gym. They're not gonna they're gonna do
something more intense.
Yeah, it's a lot for them.
So how can sensory integration, like if a child is experiencing issues with that, how can that masquerade as other issues? Because I know I've heard it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that sometimes some of the characteristics of sensory processing disorder can masquerade as autism, right? Like, it might be similar characteristics.
Yeah, and this is a huge
so there could be a child who's experiencing some sensory challenges and they may think they're on the spectrum and they're not.
This happens a lot.
Or they might be, but
Yeah, I mean, this is a lot. We see this a lot because children, especially with these modulation issues, with children who are sensitive, they try to control the environment so much because they can't. They're so close to that top border where they're so close to going into like a shutdown mode where they just can't take one more thing. They're like, please don't touch me, please don't look at me, please don't do it. Especially when they're overstimulated to the point where don't look at me. I'm just holding on by the edge of my fingertips to this reality that I've created. I'm functioning, sort of.
Right.
But if you look at me or if you change one thing in my environment, I'm really gonna lose it. Right? They set the environment up in a way that they can function. They can never get really into that optimal range, that optimal window where they can function. It presents a lot like autism. Because individuals with autism like their environment in a very specific way. They engage in a very specific way. They don't make a lot of eye contact. They don't do a lot of social things. So when you have someone who is functioning at so close to the border of being dysregulated and is struggling to keep their environment intact so that they don't become dysregulated and knows it, you know, they can appear to almost have they present as autistic. Then what we can do is when we work in that environment and we would provide them with some sensory integrative type treatment and provide them with an environment that allows them to be more modulated, and then some language around what they need, we learn that, no, this is not the case. So it masquerades as that kind of disorder. And it also masquerades as speech disorder, because if you're struggling to keep your environment intact, you don't want to talk about it. Yeah, so it's hard.
And so that's why I really think if your child has like an OT, a speech therapist, maybe an ABA therapist, school teacher, I think it's really important for everyone to work together, because you know, instead of in isolation, because a lot of these things are connected.
They really are.
Yeah.
They really are. And if you can get to the point where the team meets and you can sort of suss out what are the different behaviors at different points in time. You can start to see maybe it's not what you initially thought. Maybe it really isn't an autism diagnosis. It might be just a pure sensory processing disorder, and you can start to pull apart some of the things.
And then I found too, there are some cases where you know, like my son, he is on the autism spectrum, and he also has sensory processing.
But it can be that, so you know, when you take them apart, and you can, you know, remediate some of the sensory processing issues, life becomes easier.
It helps. It really does. It really does.
Because, you know, sensory processing issues, you know, don't have to be this big blown up thing. And then you can just deal, you know, what do you do for the autism? You know, you could just deal with that and provide, you know, specific remediation for that.
And so, like, even with that, like when he was younger and in kindergarten, he was like really, really hyperactive. And so, you know, he had his behavior plan and he had all that in place, but then we also work with the occupational therapist to make sure that she put some interventions in place. So there were some periods of time during the day where he had to wear a weighted vest, you know, not just leave it on him all day, that he had a schedule.
He had someone who had training.
So she had some training. So she knew that he had to be on a schedule. It wasn't something that it just stayed on him all day, because it starts to lose its effect. So
wonderful.
So what does all of this mean? So we've gone through a lot of some of the technical aspects of sensory integration. And I know, just based, I'm sure, you know, your extensive background, this could probably be like an all-day training, if not.
We can talk for a week. Yeah, we can talk for a week.
Exactly.
And,
so
you know,
we're
to
really,
people's specific, you know, things. I mean, there's so much that are specific to different families, because, you know, their living situation and their work situations and schools, and, you know, people are, you know, dealing with, you know, other kids and, you know, different schedules and, you know, so many different things.
So how can families use, like, say for example, so you said this can look differently for different kid, for each child. So I know typically when they're doing the evaluations, they'll offer like a sensory profile questionnaire where they're trying to get an idea of how the child is. Can you go a little bit into that and how, because I'm just trying to paint a picture for families on how you gather this data to determine what the child is experiencing.
There are so many different ways to gather data. And you know, I break it down, and, you know, we have things for different age groups, and you know, for different things that we're looking for. You know, time constraints, whether it's whether we're just doing it, whether we're doing it, privately or through the school system, whether we're doing it for early intervention, whether we're doing it for CPSC for the transition, or whether we're doing it for EI, all these different things. Whether we're looking at like pure milestone achievement or looking to enter a classroom.
So we can start at EI.
Okay.
Let's start at the really basic
Basic.
the early intervention.
For early intervention, what we're looking at is, milestone achievement. And so when we collect data, and we don't use the SIPT there because the SIPT is for older kids. So we use different tools to gather information there. We'll use a profile designed for little children. And we can use it one of two ways. We can use it as an observation, because I can sit there and use it as an observation, but I can also do it as a questionnaire for the family, or the family can fill it out. What I like to do, I do a little bit of both.
Right.
So the family I'll leave it with the family, they can fill it out over the course of some time. But I like to do it as an observation, discrete observation of what I'm seeing when I'm there.
Okay.
But I'm only there for a little bit of time, so I only get to see like a snapshot of what's happening.
Okay. So say, for example, a child was evaluated for early intervention and it was determined that they had enough of a delay to qualify for occupational therapy.
And do people understand like how they know how to qualify for early intervention?
Yeah, so if this is something,
delay?
so I know it's 33% in one area, 25% in two or more. If this is something you guys would like more information on, you can definitely contact our helpline, and I'm going to share that information at the end.
A couple of domains that you need to qualify in, and it includes cognitive, physical, social.
So I'm just wondering how this would tie into the IFSP, the Individualized Family Service Plan. So if a child qualified for OT and they had sensory processing,
because sensory is not an area where they would qualify, but the sensory integration piece would include, basically what happens is the sensory integration issues would have to be impacting the development of milestones.
Right.
So we would link it to the development for OT of fine motor skills, also adaptive skills.
Right.
Things like self-care, things like eating.
Right.
So those kinds of milestones, the development of fine motor skills, things like tactile sensitivity very often is linked to the development of poor fine motor skills.
Okay.
Things like vestibular sensitivity and vestibular issues are linked to the development of poor motor skills, ambulation, things like that, delayed walking.
Okay.
Because if you have some vestibular issues, you can't stand up.
Right.
So those kinds of things. So the sensory integration issues are linked to those delays in milestones.
Okay.
And there has to be a definitive link to those.
Okay.
So that's how we do that. But we link it there, but then when we work in early intervention, that's the foundation. We have to, you can't treat and you can't address the milestone without addressing the underlying cause of the delay of the milestone.
Right.
If it's the sensory integration issue,
you
have to start there, because if you work on trying to, develop a milestone and you don't treat the underlying problem, you're not going to get anywhere.
Right.
So we start there, and we always start with modulation.
Okay.
Because you can't fix an issue if you're not, like I said, we're starting from, your last nerve is gone.
Right.
You can't, if you're not starting from a good foundation, you can't do anything.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you brought that up, how you have to kind of work on the sensory piece first. Because I know for my daughter, before she has any kind of therapy session, she needs like a movement break. She needs some kind of engagement. She can't just sit at the table and start working on fine motor skills.
Nobody can.
She has to be able to move around, and she feels regulated, and then now she's able to sit down. And then I was actually able to share that with our CPSC admin, and that was included in her preschool IEP. so that her preschool
Right.
teachers and therapists were aware
Right, and that's,
that
yeah,
she needed this.
and that's how you carry that over
carry it
into
over.
the
Exactly.
IEP.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then now that we've spoken about that, now that you brought up IEP,
There you go.
let's move on to the preschoolers or
Right, right.
You know, how
Because
how is
you
it
know,
gonna
and
look for
that's
them?
a good thing to remember is that when you start the transition from the IFSP into the IEP, it's a huge transition because it's focused from the milestones
Right.
into accessing education.
Right.
It's not as big a leap, you know, from the into the to the IEP for the kindergarten, but there is a focus on accessing education in
Right.
CPSE. But you still link the sensory piece to those you know educational milestones
Right.
of being able to participate in the educational process. But if you can't sit at a table, you can't participate in the educational process.
Exactly.
So if you don't have that modulation, and if you don't have that vestibular skill to be able to sit upright, and that's where we talk about the postural control
Right.
necessary to sit, which is a sensory piece, you can't participate in education if you can't sit up.
Yeah.
You can't participate in education if you're not modulated and regulated. You can't hold a pencil and learn how to draw a line and write your name and begin to learn to write letters of the alphabet. If your sensory system isn't organized, you know, and if your tactile system isn't together, which is all related to fine motor skill development, which all comes from your sensory system.
Yeah.
So we relate that together in the
Right.
evaluation. You know.
So I know it's important, you know, for all of this to be combined together, right?
Mhm.
So how can families, because sometimes a family might come to a teacher or a CPSE, and when we say CPSE, it's the Committee on Preschool Special Education.
Right.
How can the family get buy-in, right? Because so I use the word buy-in because sometimes I think sensory, you know, all of, like this topic in itself, sometimes it's dismissed. Like,
Yes.
I don't know what you're talking about, you know. How can family get that buy-in for people to really understand that if a child isn't regulated, it can really impact their learning and how they're able to function in a school environment?
Well, just like that chain, that link
Yeah.
that I made.
Yeah.
You know, if a child is going to be able to sit at a table,
Right.
you know, they need to have good postural control. And
Right.
in order to have good postural control, you know, they have to have, you know, all of these muscles working. They have to have the vestibular system, you know, functioning, and semicircular canals have to be intact.
Right.
Semicircular canals are the basis of the vestibular system.
Right.
All of that has to be working in order for the child to sit upright,
Right.
which is the basis of that whole system. So that's, I mean, you can open any neurological textbook and it's right there.
Right.
So they can get buy-in by having a good evaluation.
Right.
And having this basic language, you know, this basic, it's not necessarily parent friendly, but having these terms and knowing this terminology and having a good OT evaluation that explains that all of this is necessary in order to be able to participate in education. Mm-hmm. You know, the tactile system, sensory system needs to be intact in order to be able to hold a pencil.
Right.
In order to be able to put the pencil on the paper, to write the name, to participate in education. Mm-hmm. So, you know, so they can make that chain, they could, and the parent can even make that argument at the meeting. Well, if you know, my child has sensory issues, which is directly related, you know, the tactile system is directly related to fine motor skill development, which is directly related to the ability to write.
Right.
And the parent can say that
I hope you guys
at their meeting. Those are the words that you use in your meeting.
Yes, you know, and one thing I want to say, I know for occupational therapy, the sensory piece can be included in the goals in IEP, but your child may only be in OT for twice a week, 3 times a week. It's still important for all of this to be woven into your child's school day and also at home as well. So there has to be some kind of collaboration between
the family and the
between
teacher.
the family and the teachers.
And that's where the parent can say,
Yeah.
no, sensory modulation is important so that my child can sit at the desk, so
Right.
that you can teach them and they're not going to be a pain in your butt.
Exactly. Exactly. So I know we've gone through a lot of information
There's
today.
so much
We've gone through a lot
information.
today, but I really want to get to really share with parents where they can get help, right? So I know a lot of parents, they talk about a sensory gym. Everybody wants to get the child into a sensory gym,
Oh, yes.
right?
Because
So-
we want to go on the train for 40 minutes.
Yeah, no, we don't. No, we don't.
But the sensory gyms look great.
The sensory gyms look great.
They're so much fun.
Right, they're a lot of fun. Your kids enjoys it. But where can
For
parents
an
get
hour
help?
a week.
Right, and then what happens the rest of the hours for the week, right?
Right.
So one question I want to ask is, where can parents get help? How can parents, like, if a parent thinks, okay, my child has sensory processing challenges, you know, does my child need to go to a sensory gym? Do I need to
Well,
get an
first off,
evaluation?
does my child have sensory processing challenge?
Right, that's the first thing.
Do they really?
Right, okay. So how can a parent
Or
figure that
are
out to
they
get help?
just a little, it's like, you know, or are they just, you know, I don't want to say this, you know, are they just a little dysregulated? Are they just overtired?
Right,
Are they just, you know, at a point where, because fatigue is fatigue.
right.
And if you're a little dysregulated and then you throw fatigue on top of it, it looks really bad.
Right.
It looks like it's very challenging. So my first thing to say to parents is get a schedule. Let's just start there. Try that for yourself. But when you want to get help, get an OT who is trained in this, because not everybody is trained in this. It is not part, it is touched on in the curriculum like dentistry is touched on in med school.
Right.
Like, oh, here's a chapter. You have teeth.
But you don't want that person cleaning the teeth. if they didn't get
Right,
the
you
right
don't want
training.
them pulling your teeth.
Exactly,
Like,
exactly.
it is touched on in our curriculum.
Right.
But then you come out and you're like, you know, just like I don't do splinting anymore. I was like, you know, when I was in OT school, they were like, here's a splint. I'm like, oh, that's fascinating. It's great. I'm not making your splint. You do not want me to make your splints. Trust me. So get somebody who's trained. Get somebody who knows what they're doing, and get somebody who knows what they're looking at when they're looking at your child. Because talking with somebody for a half an hour who knows what they're looking at and knows what they're seeing can be more valuable than hours of evaluation and programming.
Yeah.
It absolutely can. Having said that, when they're assessing your child, let them look. And I know I hate to say this, but it is so true. Let them poke around your life. Let them poke around in your house via video. Let them come to your house and just sit there. Because you want them to see as bad as it gets. Because that's what you want them to help you fix.
Yeah.
You don't want them to help you fix the good stuff. You want them to fix the really nasty, dirty, horrifying meltdowns that your child is having.
Mm-hmm.
And because that's what they're there for. That's what we're there for. We want to fix the crying that they have, that you have, that everybody's crying and throwing themselves on the floor, and hopefully they're not hitting their heads. We want to use the tools. If we're going to give you a sensory profile, take your time with it. Fill it out. Be brutally honest with yourself. It's just not the time for, this is what I hope my family looks like. No.
So
Fill it out.
do families really need to take their child to a sensory gym?
Yes and no.
Okay.
Sensory gyms are great to learn. Do not drop your kid off at the sensory gym and then go have coffee.
Yeah. It's not respite.
Yeah, respite is different. I've done respite. Right. Respite is different.
It's not childcare.
I've done respite, and I've run a respite home where
Right.
I will take your child for 2 weeks and you will go on vacation and we will go to the beach with your child.
That sounds nice.
Oh my God, it was great. It was a great program. It was in New Jersey. So I took the kids for 2 weeks to the beach, and parents went away. Go into the gym. Learn what they're doing, because what they're doing in that gym is what you're going to do with your kid on the playground.
Right.
You're not going to do it in your house. You're going to do it on the playground. Okay? But then get somebody to come to your house and show you what you're going to do in real life. You need somebody in your life. Okay? You need somebody to be there with you in real life, whether it's on a video, whether it's on the phone. My kid is throwing things around the house. What do? They're trying to communicate something. What are they going to try to do? What do you need somebody there with you to break down what's happening in your life. The phrase natural environment therapy is no joke, because life happens in your house, in the grocery store, in the department store. This is where you need your therapist. This is where the therapist is going to be most valuable to you. And there are people that do it. There really are. Telehealth is a real thing.
So, I know some of you may be wondering, how do you find out if the OT has had this training, and how do you request an evaluation? We do have a resource packet that everybody's going to get. So we have a really great tip sheet that Melissa created that has some really good information in there for everybody, so you can get more information. So we're kind of winding down now. I don't know if anybody has any questions. But one quick thing I wanted to talk about a little bit before we wrap up is about sensory diet. So I know I'm kind of throwing that in at the end, but sensory diet,
it is so important.
We hear about that a lot. So what is a sensory diet, and how can that help a child?
Man, it does not involve carrots.
Yes.
Sensory diet, and it's basically what I was talking about. We touched on a little bit earlier about creating that modulation.
Right.
And I'm glad we have like a few minutes. I'm looking at the clock. I don't know if the clock is right. Creating that schedule, creating that way for a child to get modulated if they can throughout the day. And what will happen is, if you can get in touch with a professional gather information and get yourself on a schedule and monitor your child, monitor your family even, so that get organized. And I know it's painful for people who are not organized, but get organized and get your child and yourself. This will be helpful for you too. Your body learns to anticipate things. So if you can get organized and get on a schedule, what happens is your body will learn to anticipate things. And then what you can do is layer on top of that sensory activities that are favorable for your child. So if you get on a schedule, you get up at the same time every day, you go to bed at the same time every day, you do things at the same time every day, your body will learn to anticipate those things.
Right.
Okay? So then on top of that, you start to layer favorable sensory activities. When I mean favorable sensory activities, these are activities that you have learned through evaluation and working with your therapist.
Right.
These activities that your child's body needs, whether they're a seeker or an avoider or whatever it is that they do to regulate and get your child into that optimal range periodically throughout the day. So if your child starts to go like this, you want to bring them back in here, and you scatter these activities to bring your child back in. So the sensory diet puts your kid back in this range throughout the course of the day. So the sensory diet is doing things at a specific time every day, not as militant as it seems. There is room for wiggle room, but having dinner at the same time every day, having the same bedtime routine, having the set bedtime, weeknights, weekends, getting up at the same time every day. You will thank yourself. 6 months from now,
right,
you will feel better, your kid will feel better, and you will have that regulation of the system that allows your child to start to feel better, to start to be available for learning and playing and engaging with peers. So that's like the brief overview of what the sensory diet is.
Right.
There are volumes more that we could talk about what the sensory diet is and what it includes, but it includes things like wearing a weighted vest on a schedule.
Right.
It includes things like very specific types of activities, whether it's controlled jumping, whether it's uncontrolled jumping, whether it's different kinds of exercises or dancing or playing,
right,
different kinds of things, whether it includes even special kinds of like foods,
right,
like do different things to your to your jaw, proprioceptive, interoceptive kinds of foods, hot foods, cold foods, different things like that.
Right.
You can get very specific. And it's really fascinating. You can tell I'm such a geek sometimes. But it really does help.
Right.
You know, sleeping with a weighted blanket for a specific amount of time, napping with a weighted blanket versus all of these other things. But it is so helpful. Sensory diet is so helpful. We do it automatically.
And we don't even realize we're doing it.
Don't even realize we're doing it.
So, wow, this was really interesting, fascinating. I learned a lot.
I hope so.
Yeah, I did.
hope everybody else
I
did
hope
too.
you guys did too. We have some good resources that we're going to be sending out to you. I just want to thank you so much, Melissa. It's been great.
It's been my absolute
over the last few weeks, just trying to get all of this together. And I really appreciate everything. And I want to give a quick story. So how I linked up with Melissa, the OT who evaluated my daughter for early intervention referred me to her. So it's a small world.
Yes, it is.
It's a small world.
He and I have known each other for years.
Yes.
Years.
It is a really, really small world. So I just want to thank everybody for tuning in. I want to also let you guys know that December 19th, here's the flyer. We have another live stream coming up called Gender Development, Expression, and Play. So that's going to be a really interesting one. And the question is, when and how do children develop an understanding of gender? So please tune in. Yes, it is. Definitely tune in. So that's going to be December 19th from 12 to 1. So one quick thing. This is our helpline card. Call the helpline if you have any questions about anything that you heard today. If you need more information, everybody should be getting the resource packet. And we will see you at our next INCLUDEnyc Live, Real Conversations on Parenting and Disability. All right.
Thank you.
All right.